Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's SB 1383 Chat with CalRecycle. Today, we're focusing on SB 1383 implementation of multifamily dwellings. We understand that addressing organic collection in multifamily properties can be challenging. That's why we're thrilled to have our presenters share their experience and successes in this area. My name is Ward Danner, and I will be your facilitator for today's chat. I'm an environmental scientist, a senior environmental scientist here at CalRecycle, local assistance and market development branch. This session was organized by Diane Suarez-Reguez, who will be supporting in the background. Also assisting, we have Darren Sprecher and Mallory Burden, providing technical assistance. We also have Adriana Salat, Michaela Leonard, and Carla Miller handling presenter introductions. We also have Zach Smith moderating the Q&A, and Alexis Arnes, Marshall Graham, and Kara Morgan answering questions. Now let's hear from our branch chief, Marshall Graham, to kick off things. Next slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Ward. And good afternoon. I'm thrilled to once again participate in the SB 1383 Chat with CalRecycle series. This is our second chat of the year, and it's so encouraging to see you all already greeting each other and getting familiar with who's on the call so that we can be fully engaged. To get us started, I do have a couple of announcements. First, in response to fielding a number of related questions, on March 10th, CalRecycle sent out a listserv message regarding the business requirements for organic recycling collection and clarifying that businesses also have the right to donate or sell their materials, and that's pursuant to Public Resources Code section 41952. The second announcement I have is for the CalRecycle April public meeting, which will be held on April 22nd. And this will be a little bit different in the sense that this meeting will be held only virtually. There will not be an in-person option for the April meeting. Then getting back to the task at hand, we have an outstanding array of incredibly knowledgeable speakers to share implementation experiences, best management practices, and strategies to overcome barriers in implementation. Today's topic of recycling collection in multifamily dwellings brings its own unique suite of challenges, and we are so grateful to hear directly from local experts. While our CalRecycle team has definitely honed the recipe to develop and run these regular chats on relevant topics, the active ingredient in these engagements are really the presenters. With that, thank you. I think that will get us started, Ward.
Thank you, Marshall. Let's see, before we continue, let's review a few logistical items about the QA process. For this webinar, we'll be using the Q&A function. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A pane. While the chat function is available for sharing resources and with other participants, we will not be monitoring the chat for questions. So please make sure to use the Q&A pane for that. If you do not see the Q&A pane, ensure that you have the latest version of Zoom installed. Our team will review submitted questions on the Q&A pane throughout the webinar. The Q&A session will begin after the presentations. If you're called upon to speak during the Q&A session, please state your name, affiliation, and restate your question for clarity. If your question is directed to a specific panelist, be sure to mention that. If you're unable to unmute yourself or access the Q&A pane, please feel free to email your questions to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov using the subject line SB 1383 Chat with CalRecycle. If we don't get to your question during the session, a land representative will follow up with you after the webinar. Next slide, please. So our presentations today are, we're having West Valley Solid Waste Management Authority, HF&H Consultants, Mill, also the City of Lodi, San Francisco Environmental Department, and waste experts. They'll be sharing their strategies and successes in SB 1383 multifamily dwellings. Now, Michaela will introduce our first presenter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michaela Leonard, and I am an environmental scientist here in the Local Assistant and Market Development Branch, and I am the Local Assistant Contact for Santa Clara County. I will be introducing West Valley Recycles, HF&H Consultants, and Mill. First, we have Rob Hilton, who is the president and a partner at HF&H Consultants with over 20 years of experience in solid waste consulting. He specializes in complex data-driven projects and stakeholder engagement. Rob has managed over 580 projects for 150 plus public agencies nationwide, focusing on recycling, organics, and solid waste services. A leading expert on SB 1383 implementation, he has contributed to the regulatory process, engaged with stakeholders, and presented at key events. Passionate about behavior change, Rob has advocated for the implementation of CBSM strategies to encourage sustainable practices in waste management. Next, we have Sarah Peral, who is a senior associate at HF&H Consultants with over 15 years of experience in solid waste education and outreach. She specializes in creating and executing targeted communication campaigns to support SB 1383 compliance, solid waste diversion, and zero waste goals. Sarah has provided technical assistance to businesses, residents, and organizations, helping them implement waste reduction strategies, conduct waste audits, and set up diversion infrastructure. She has developed community-based social marketing programs aimed at addressing specific behaviors that drive sustainable waste management. By identifying barriers and benefits to adopting desired behaviors, she designs strategies to overcome challenges and motivate stakeholders. Through customized messaging, program design, and active engagement, Sarah ensures the successful adoption of waste diversion practices. She has effectively facilitated outreach for numerous agencies and organizations, working closely with businesses and residents to implement impactful programs and achieve zero waste objectives. Lastly, we have Sydney Yang Hoffman with Mill. Sydney Yang Hoffman leads partner success and implementation for municipal programs at Mill. She works closely with municipalities to design, implement, and monitor commercial and residential programs. Prior to joining Mill, Sydney drove strategic partnerships and implementation for the exemplars in global health programs at Gates Ventures. Sydney started her career in management consulting with Bain & Company, where she supported clients across a variety of sectors, including tech, healthcare, and private equity. Sydney is a graduate of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned a BS in economics with concentrations in management and operations.
All right, with that, we'll launch on in. Welcome everybody to this chat this afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to join. I'm going to introduce our group and then turn it over quickly to Sarah and Sydney to run with this. This project is a partnership between HF&H Consultants, West Valley Recycles, who's a client of ours. We act as the executive director and staff for the Joint Powers Authority, which consists of Saratoga, Los Gatos, Montecito, and Campbell, which are some of the highest diversion jurisdictions in the state. And we are continually looking to improve that. And we have a pilot project going on with Mill Industries right now as well as a separate pilot that we're running with the city of Sunnyvale that's sort of a sister to this project. So that'll be what we're focused on today, and particularly on how we're using community-based social marketing in these pilots to really measure effectiveness. Next slide. So today we'll really be focused on what those multifamily treatments are for the pilots, give you an introduction to what the pilot is and what we're trying to do, and then get our hands a little bit dirty with what we saw in the visual waste audits. We'll introduce MIL as our technology treatment and talk about some of the early results that we've got. I want to note that all of these pilots are still in their infancy, and we expect that we'll have final results and reports out later this year, hopefully in time for conference season in August with CRRA and special districts and a number of others where we intend to present the final results of this. So next slide. Our purpose in getting off into this multifamily pilot, like most of you, is that we've really had a successful implementation for many years of our single family recycling programs and organics programs. And our communities generally in the single family sector are between 65 and 75% recovery of what the hauler collects, a very high recovery level. And in fact, for one of our jurisdictions, if you look at the state calculated diversion, it's in excess of 96%. So we had very mature programs, very effective programs. For single family, we find that our business implementation has been pretty good. It could still use some work, but in multifamily, we were seeing recovery rates in the sub 15% area, and felt like this needs some attention. And it needs a program where we can actually demonstrate that what we're doing in terms of the spend on the education is working. Under our old contract, we spent a certain amount of money every year with our hauler to do education and outreach, but there were no mechanisms in it to understand who is this targeting, how are we engaging with their particular behaviors and their barriers, how are we measuring the effectiveness of what we're doing. And so as part of a new contract that implemented in March of 2024 for our agency, our board of directors asked that we have demonstration of results and demonstration of how effectively we're spending the money for these things going forward. So this study to look at the effectiveness of various treatments on multifamily properties made a lot of sense for us. And as we were beginning to spool up on the West Valley Recycles project, our neighbors over in Sunnyvale reached out to us. HF&H is an on-call consultant to Sunnyvale, and said, hey, we're interested in doing some multifamily pilots too, using some more traditional treatments. And so we're working collaboratively between them to look at a bunch of different sites and to compare the effectiveness of these traditional treatments to the technology treatment that Mill will introduce you to later. So at this point, we'll change slides, and I will turn it over to Sarah to walk us through what we saw in the first bit of the assessments.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be talking about how we measure success in the pilot programs using visual waste audits. It's really important when you're developing a pilot program to identify a key metric early on in the process, because what we found is that we really use a lot of this data throughout the pilot to in a bunch of different ways. Of course, one, assessing the pilot's impact, that's the overall goal. But also we have refined strategies throughout the start of the pilot based on things that we have learned. So for both the City of Sunnyvale and West Valley Recycles, these pilot programs implemented pre and post treatment audits. And so far, we have completed all of the pre-treatment audits across all pilot sites to establish a baseline. This baseline was really important for us because we really didn't know where we were with the programs at the time. The multifamily sector can be a bit challenging to understand program participation. And so these baseline audits, these pre-treatment audits, really gave us a lot of insight that was valuable to the starting of our program development. So I'll talk a little bit about what these visual audits are and how we conducted them. So these audits involved systematically reviewing all of the waste streams at each MFD site over the span of 1 week. And what we did was we had the collection containers from each site delivered to the audit site for us to process that material. The collection contractor delivered them full. And then we documented some key data points. The type of data points that we were looking at was ensuring that the type of materials that were being brought to us were consistent with what we were expecting. Also, how full each container was when it was delivered to us, and then the weight of the materials inside of that container. And again, we did this for every site and every material stream. Next, we would empty the materials onto the audit floor, and we would break those bags open and really just lay it out similar to the image that you see here. And we're conducting a detailed visual audit to categorize that contamination. And we're also looking at, are there any disposal habits or trends that we can identify that might potentially help us with our strategy development. With the baseline audit or the pre-treatment audit, we found that the overall diversion rates for those sites were ranging from about 2% at the lowest to 32% at the highest, which really documented that need for that targeted intervention. And so we're excited to see the post-treatment audits to see if that made an impact. Next slide, please. So I want to take a closer look at the landfill streams from the West Valley Recycles pilot. So at the treatment site, we found that about 17% of the materials placed into the landfill container were food scraps. And this was despite having access to organics containers at the site. Participation in the food scrap recycling program was just really minimal. We really didn't see hardly any food scraps in the actual organics containers. We did find that they primarily use those containers for yard trimmings. At the control site, however, we found that about 10% of the landfill materials was food scraps. And this site actually showed higher participation in food scraps recycling, which aligns with that lower contamination rate in the landfill stream. So what does that mean? It means that there's a lot of food scraps being placed in the landfill, which is unfortunate, but good news is there's plenty of room for us to improve on that. And by conducting these post-treatment audits, we'll be able to track whether positive trends are being seen, supporting that effectiveness of the pilot that we're implementing. So essentially, in our post-treatment audits, we are wanting to see the landfill material stream to have less of that food scraps contamination, that percentage to go down. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what did we see in the landfill containers? This is an image from one of the pre-treatment audits. This is landfill material. And what we were finding is that there was a significant amount of food scraps, particularly whole and peeled fruits and vegetables. This audit was conducted in October, so we did find some pumpkins in there, but there was also just a significant amount of just prep peelings of vegetables and fruits. We also found that there was a lot of packaged fruits and vegetables, and so we found oranges that were still in the mesh bags. We found clamshells full of grapes or strawberries. residents weren't taking that extra step to pull that food waste out. We also found a lot of loaves of bread. And so once a resident identified that their bread was spoiled, they threw that loaf of bread in the plastic directly into the landfill. Of course, there was plate clearings, leftover food after a meal, unfinished takeout meals, and then we also identified yard waste and yard trimmings were the bulk of the organics found in that stream. Next slide, please. One interesting trend that we did identify across both pilots in both City of Sunnyvale and West Valley Recycles was this source separation behavior. So if you can see in these images, there's a couple of bags of food scraps. What we saw was many residents were already separating their food scraps, but then placing those plastic bags into the landfill container. And this tells us that the behavior of setting food scraps aside has already been established, possibly due to past education and outreach, or just household habits. The challenge lies in the next steps, so proper disposal. And by doing these waste audits, we are understanding where this breakdown occurs, and it allows us to fine-tune our approach and remove those barriers to participation. So this is an example of some of the trends that we are identifying during the waste audit, in addition to tracking those data points. With that, I will conclude my portion of the presentation and hand this over to Sydney at Mill to continue the deep dive into our West Valley pilot.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. As you all will see, the waste audit was critical as we think about impact and also messaging as part of the outreach. So big thank you to Sarah and Rob for all the work that they did on that waste audit. As Sarah and Michaela mentioned, I'm Sydney Yang Hoffman. I drive our partner success and implementation for municipal programs at Mill. I'm also joined on the line today by Scott Smithline. He's our head of organics and policy research and an advisor for this pilot. He'll be here to help answer any questions that come up today. So we're really thrilled to be partnering and learning alongside West Valley and HF&H to see how the Mill food recycler can impact organics diversion in multifamily. Today's talk will include a brief introduction to Mill, but we'll primarily be focusing on the West Valley pilot and our initial learnings from implementation. Next slide, please. So first off, what is Mill? Mill is an effortless, fully automated food recycler. You can add nearly any food item, so a full chicken or turkey carcass, all the way to avocado pits. You set the start time, and from there, the food recycler runs overnight, and it runs automatically. It's also odorless. So there are 2 million square meters of charcoal in each device. These charcoal containers last about 12 to 18 months for the average household, depending on use. We also have a dry and grind system that reduces food waste volume by 80%. So it can process about 8 pounds per day or up to 40 pounds of wet food scraps before needing to be emptied. And for the average household, they're emptying the mill about once a month. Lastly, Mill has a built-in scale that can feed real-time data into an app. And that's where users can see their impact in real time, as well as look up what can and can't go in their mill. So that app has become a critical resource, helping to reinforce some positive behavior changes. If you're curious to learn more about the product specs, I know I breezed through those, and how we partner with municipalities, which I will touch on next, you can check them out on our website at mill.com, and we'll drop that link in the chat for you all. Next slide, please. So while a number of Mill users do choose to use food grounds in their home compost piles or gardens, we also have a dedicated municipal team that partners with cities to integrate Mill into their local systems and businesses. Typically in California, as is the case in our West Valley pilot, This means putting food grounds in curbside or shared organics carts and then processing them at commercial composting facilities. Next slide. In multifamily specifically, mill can be deployed in every apartment or as a communal bin in common spaces, and we have models and examples of both. Each has their different pros and cons, but in the West Valley pilot, we're really looking at using mill as a treatment in every apartment. I'm now going to shift gears and focus the remainder of today's presentation on the pilot. However, if you're interested in exploring ways mill can support your organics diversion goals, please do reach out. I know myself and our municipal team who's on the line today would love to chat. Next slide. Okay, so diving into the West Valley pilot. We are just over 3 months in, and actually, do you mind flipping the next slide again? So we're just over 3 months in, and today's presentation is going to be a preview of our early results. As Rob mentioned, these pilots are very much in their infancy, but we'll touch on baseline behaviors and attitudes that we've learned from our residents, how they feel towards composting. We'll touch on education and recruitment tactics that we've learned both from our phase 1 of outreach as well as insights from the waste audit that Sarah presented. And then lastly, talk about impact to date. Next slide. So we started by sending a launch survey to everyone who signed up to participate in the pilot. This survey aims to get a baseline of behaviors and attitudes towards composting before using mill. Our response rate is currently at 60%, so not a huge N, but we have additional responses coming in as residents continue to sign up. The results I'll share today are a teaser, and the real insights will come at the end of the pilot when we're able to compare these with the post-pilot survey responses, post-pilot waste audit results, and conduct our final analysis. So diving in, next slide. First, we asked about behavior at the landfill cart. And for us at Mill, this is really interesting to see what messaging might resonate as we think about recruitment and outreach. So here we see first on the left-hand side, over 80% of residents are taking out their trash multiple times a week. This suggests to us that emptying trash is a meaningful chore. Going out to the trash can multiple times, it's not something that is easy to do or takes an insignificant amount of time. We also see on the right-hand side that over 50% report that landfill carts are over halfway full, suggesting it's not an ideal experience for residents or haulers. Next, on the next slide, we asked residents why they put food scraps in the garbage. And about 45% cite it factor, closely followed by not enough space in the home. We then went one level deeper and asked what were their main barriers to putting all their food scraps out in the organics cart. So these are folks that are source separating but might not be putting everything in their organics cart. And in that case, the majority cited space, followed by ick factor. Lastly, on the next slide, we asked residents who are currently source separating what methods they use at home. Now, this question had a lower response rate because not all residents are source separating, and some respondents didn't choose to respond to this question. But that being said, the most common responses were countertop pails and freezers. Next slide. So as Rob and Sarah mentioned, participation remains a persistent challenge in multifamily, and we strove to take a multi-channel approach to education and recruitment and tracked which channels were most effective. So on the next slide, the 3 channels that we focused on in our first phase were in-person outreach, second physical collateral, and third digital engagement. So within in-person outreach, this included activities like hosting events, donuts and coffee, a launch day party, try and bring community feel to this program and community buy-in. We also were on site a number of times tabling, so we were available to meet the residents when they were available, as well as going door to door. In regards to physical collateral, we distributed flyers to all residents and hung them in communal spaces. We distributed door hangers, And we also posted wayfinding signage instructing residents to dispose their food grounds in the organics carts. Lastly, we use digital engagement. So we have a landing page which explains more about the program, how to get involved, why this is important and matters, and then supplemented that with an email series that has gone out to all residents. Lastly, we engaged the property manager to be a champion of the program, and she's really been a tremendous support. She's helped promote the program to current and new residents. She's helped distribute promotional materials. And lastly, she offered to keep a demo bin in the leasing office for the first month of the pilot, which helped residents really get a chance to interact with the product. Next slide, please. So at 3 months into the pilot, we've achieved 43 participations so far. As we expect, we see an initial rush in signups consistent with new product adoption curves, where early adopters followed by early majority show most interest and engagement early on. We've also gained insight into which channels are most effective, and we'll be using those insights to help focus our efforts for the remainder of the pilot, as well as tailor our messaging. So as we look to phase 2 of our recruitment efforts, we're going to focus specifically on 1, implementing a neighbor referral program to help scale that impact of in-person engagement. 2, sending direct mail to residents we haven't been able to reach in person with messaging tailored to address the pain points that we've heard about from residents to date. And 3rd, we'll be sending additional property-wide emails highlighting the potential of collective impact and using the influence of collective action, as well as featuring residents who love their mill. Next slide, please. So a powerful part and a really exciting part about deploying mill is the household level data and insights that we're able to generate. Next slide, please. So first off, we know it's working. Once a household has a mill, we are seeing over 95% capture rate. This is based on the waste audit. So we observed the average household food scrap generation is around 6.22 pounds of food scraps per week. Importantly, this is directional. It's based on 1 week of observed data and across a sample size of 58 occupied units. However, for mill, we're able to see that mills are processing 6.09 pounds of food scraps per week, or about equivalent to 0.87 pounds of food scraps per day. In contrast to the waste audit, we are able to measure this diversion with a very high precision up to that 100th of a pound, as well as gut check these results against our fleet-wide data, which now encompasses over 6 million observed days and tens of thousands of households. As we expect, in multifamily, the observed diversion of 0.87 pounds per day is slightly lower than our fleet-wide average of 1 pound per day, but that 1 pound encompasses both single and multifamily households. Lastly, there's this stat, this 3.5 lid opens per day. This to us is an indicator of behavior change and source separation becoming a household habit. It shows that households are using their mill multiple times a day. Pausing on this for a moment, it really is incredible to see this pace of change immediately upon setting up their mill. So when we look at how diversion evolves from when someone sets up their mill to how it changes over time, you see an early spike with people getting excited as they're setting it up, but then a leveling out around this 0.87, which is really exciting to us and is showing that consistent use. Flipping to the next slide and starting to zoom out to the building level. So going beyond the household and looking at our treatment site overall, we are already diverting about 24% of food scraps. From the waste audit, we estimated that our treatment site generates about 360 pounds of food scraps per week. With Mill's current run rate of 87 pounds per week, Mill's current run rate is 87 pounds per week. So this is slightly below If you were to take that 0.87 pounds, multiply it by 7, and multiply it by our participation rate, but it's a lagging indicator and encompasses folks that have maybe just received their meal bin or just haven't been home, they've been traveling and haven't had a chance to set it up yet. So we'll expect this 87 pounds per week to continue to increase as more meals come online. Next slide, please. Lastly, zooming all the way out to why we're here today. As most of you know, the goal of SB 1383 is to reduce organics waste disposal by 75%. Based on household food scrap generation that we've observed in our pilot, that's equivalent to about 504,000 tons per household, or sorry, 504,000 tons per year across the multifamily dwellings in California. At a 95% capture rate, mill food recyclers can meaningfully contribute to this goal, with the impact scaling linearly with every household that we're able to get on board. So thank you so much for joining and listening to our presentation today. I look forward to answering any questions you might have here or in follow-up conversations. With that, I'll hand it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Rob, Sarah, and Sydney for your presentations. Hello, everyone. My name is Adriana, and I am the local assistance representative for the San Joaquin County area. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Tiffany Christie. Tiffany has been with the City of Lodi for 10 years, and in her current role as a management analyst, she primarily focuses on solid waste and recycling, specializing in SB 1383 related programs. Tiffany is currently attending University of the Pacific to continue her education and earn a degree in organizational leadership. Tiffany, please take it away.
We're having some technical difficulties with the city of Lodi. If you please hold tight, we're trying to get Tiffany back so she can speak about the wonderful programs of Lodi.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tiffany.
Okay.
Here's Tiffany.
And okay, I apologize, guys. I've had technical difficulties all day. So let's see if we can get this going. Again, hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Christie. I'm with the City of Lodi. In my current role as a management analyst, I manage solid waste and recycling for the city, primarily focusing on SB 1383 programs, including organics recycling. Next slide. The City of Lodi is located in the Central Valley at the very north end of San Joaquin County and is home to approximately 68,000 residents. The city services over 24,000 solid waste accounts, with about 3,200 of those being multifamily units. Last year, in partnership with our franchise hauler, WM, the city rolled out organics recycling to all city customers, both residential and commercial. Residential weekly collection began in January of 2024, with commercial weekly service following in March of that same year. Our most difficult task when implementing organics recycling was finding a way to successfully provide services at multifamily properties. Multifamily properties continue to be a struggle due to tenant or resident anonymity and lack of accountability at the bin. Finding a way to encourage multifamily residents to sort their waste streams and recycle can be difficult. After implementing weekly organics recycling for both residential and commercial customers, we came up with a plan to separately implement organics at multifamily properties. We chose to do this separate from commercial businesses to allow for a more customized approach specific to the needs and demands of a multifamily property. Next slide. To encourage a smooth transition to include organics recycling at multifamily properties and to involve property owners in the process, we scheduled a town hall style meeting involving multifamily property owners and property management teams to provide background and information, as well as get their input before rolling out the implementation plan. We quickly realized we did not have the buy-in from the stakeholders we needed to move forward. Like many cities, Lodi was working under a corrective action plan with deadlines that didn't allow for setbacks. We quickly pivoted and decided that buy-in from stakeholders was the only way to move forward successfully. Next slide. Our team reached out to the largest and most vocal multifamily property owner within city limits to propose a pilot program that would allow the city to test strategies and make adjustments in a real environment and monitor actual results. We wanted to provide the tools and education needed to be as successful as possible in a challenging environment. We would then use those results to provide organics recycling citywide as efficiently as possible. We knew the relationship we built with RPM would be important to the process. We met with RPM and their management team to discuss the options and benefits of implementing a pilot program at their Lodi properties. Next slide. Once we had RPM's support, we partnered with our franchise hauler to meet with each property's on-site manager and maintenance staff to evaluate the existing service levels and identify ways to improve resident participation. We also analyzed collection data to determine patterns and overages and contamination by enclosure and day of the week, allowing us to alter collection schedules to reduce unnecessary charges. As part of the individual evaluations at each property, we added recycling and organics collection at each enclosure that didn't already have one, so residents had easy access to all three waste streams. All non-compliant lids were swapped out for the appropriate lid color for all bins, and old or faded labeling was replaced with new, clear labels in multiple languages as needed. Sorting guides were posted within enclosures, and in some cases, a site map showing where additional enclosures were located to provide additional access when bins were full or when multiple bins were not available at every enclosure due to space constraints. Next slide. In addition to the proper tools being available at each enclosure, we wanted to provide education and outreach supported by RPM to further simplify waste sorting and proper disposal for residents. Sorting guides were provided to all residents by the city and WM through RPM's management team to introduce a new organic waste stream. The education materials were provided in multiple languages, including sorting guides and door hangers that provided information regarding SB 1383, organics recycling, and helpful tips to avoid contamination. We also use this as an opportunity to provide additional information about recycling and overages. My favorite events held during the pilot program were pizza parties for the residents. WM provided pizza and cold drinks by the pool at the pilot properties in the early evening when many residents were just getting home. Families were able to enjoy the pool on a warm evening, and parents a much-needed break from cooking after a busy day. We were able to engage residents in an informal, casual setting, providing counter pails, magnets, and sorting guides, while answering real-life questions from those actually affected by the changes. Next slide. After providing the tools to succeed, making adjustments to collection schedules, and providing resident outreach, we implemented organics recycling at all 6 pilot properties. The properties included in the pilot program range from 60 to 156 units in varying locations, property ages, and offered amenities. Additionally, we monitored collection data and checked in with RPM property management and maintenance staff regularly to see how the program was going from their perspective. Next slide. Overall, the data from the pilot program shows improvement for both overages and contamination. However, the contamination numbers are most noteworthy. Across all properties included in the pilot, contamination incidents dropped by approximately 43%. Overage instances originally dipped by about the same percentage, but came back up, stabilizing at about a 12% decrease over the duration of the pilot program. Overages are most often experienced after the weekend, with about half of all overages occurring on Monday collection days. Generally, overages can be attributed to high rate of turnover at multifamily properties. Next slide. Using the data we collected during the pilot program, we moved forward with citywide implementation of multifamily organics using a 3-contact approach. We began outreach with a letter explaining organics recycling, how it affects multifamily properties, how they can voluntarily comply, and what will happen if they don't. We also encourage property owners or property managers to take advantage of a free waste evaluation provided by WM and provided additional resources to make implementation as smooth as possible. Our second mailing included FAQs and sorting guides for all properties. WM initiated the 3rd contact with additional information regarding mandatory cart drop and collection information prior to implementation. We followed up with social media posts and additional information on the city's solid waste webpage. Multifamily organics recycling implementation took place in September of 2024 with little to no fanfare. Mandatory cart drop was phased over a couple of weeks, with service beginning the week following delivery. The city continues to partner with RPM to provide ongoing education and outreach. The city has provided kitchen pails for new tenants to encourage organics recycling. Property management teams are committed to providing sorting guides and other handouts to new tenants and regularly to all residents via email. More resident outreach events are currently being considered to further inspire recycling of all materials. These benefits have been offered to all multifamily properties in Lodi, with a few taking advantage of the additional resources and personalized guidance. Although we don't have the exact data, driver surveys have indicated that participation in organics recycling is slowly increasing as more and more residents are being educated. We continue to monitor multifamily collection data to modify outreach to target specific areas that have been identified as needing improvement. Next slide. Multifamily organics recycling continues to be challenging, with each property presenting its own unique issues. Space constraints and unsecure enclosures provide the biggest obstacles. Being able to work through some of these issues in real time, make adjustments, and monitor data provided so much value to the city and to the participating properties. We're very proud of the relationships that we have built within our multifamily communities, including the exceptional partnership with RPM and WM. Their commitment and dedication and willingness to support the city made the multifamily organics recycling program a rewarding experience and led the way for Lodi to implement a successful program citywide. And it looks like I might have been a little bit off on my slides there. Sorry about that. And that is the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions you might have at the end of all the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tiffany, and hello, everyone. My name is Carla Miller, the local assistance representative for San Francisco, and it is my pleasure to introduce our last presenters. First, we have Freddie Coronado, a residential zero waste specialist for the city and county of San Francisco. Freddie works for the San Francisco Environment Department, where he leads the implementation and enforcement of the city's zero waste policies across the residential multifamily sectors. He has a decade of experience working in the field of zero waste, which includes collaborating closely with haulers, consultants, property managers, residents, large refuse generators, event producers, and affordable housing property developers. Prior to SFE, Freddie worked on projects with Cascadia Consulting, Gigantic Idea Studio, and Recology San Francisco. He sits on the Northern California Recycling Association Board of Directors. In 2023, Freddie completed the 545-mile AIDS lifecycle bike ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles, raising funds for the SF AIDS Foundation and SF LGBTQ Center, a challenge he plans to participate in again this June. Next, we have...
Oh, sorry.
what was that? Sorry about that. Next, we have Mian Mael, the Chief Officer at Waste Experts, a company dedicated to helping multifamily dwelling communities optimize their waste management and recycling efforts. With over 8 years of experience in the solid waste industry, Mian has developed a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities in sustainable waste solutions. As a strategic leader, Mian is passionate about driving innovation in recycling programs, reducing waste disposal costs, and improving operational efficiency for property owners and managers. She works closely with clients to develop tailored, progressive recycling programs that enhance sustainability while ensuring compliance with local regulations. Under her leadership, Waste Experts has expanded its impact, empowering communities to adopt smarter waste management practices that benefit both the environment and their bottom line. Mian remains committed to transforming the way multifamily properties approach waste and recycling, creating cleaner, greener communities for the future. Welcome, Freddie and Mian.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. I can go ahead and get started. Next slide. So I think all of you, I love California. Actually, I grew up in Lodi, so it was great to hear of the efforts being done in Lodi. One of the reasons why I got into recycling is, believe it or not, when I was in high school, City of Lodi sent my family a photo of what doesn't belong in the recycling with a giant circle around the contaminants. And this was like 2009. So it's really full circle to be here on this webinar. Again, I'm with the city and county of San Francisco. We are a city of 800,000, crammed into 7 by 7 square miles. So it's only 49 square miles. It has a huge density population. A lot of our residents do live in multifamily properties. Next slide. Before I get more into the sector that I do love, multifamily is challenging, but it's my favorite one. These are our 2030 zero waste targets. I don't believe we're close to them, but yet they're still there. Reduce generation by 15% and disposal by 50%. So these are pretty ambitious goals. We have to target consumption, which is not easy. Next slide. Our waste reduction goals are part of our overall climate action plan, so which is energy supply, transportation, land use, housing, building operations. Zero waste falls under responsible production and consumption, and to a part healthy ecosystems. So we're still moving away, I guess. Zero waste is part of climate action. That's what I'm trying to say here. And composting is an essential part of healthy ecosystems. We all know why it's important. So we are committed to increasing recovery of organics from landfill. Next slide. In San Francisco, recycling, composting has been one of the most foundational policies for driving increased recovery of recyclables and compostables and reducing landfill. This law significantly increased our composting collection within a month of implementation. This was in 2009. We do have a 98 service compliance rate with residents, businesses, commercial accounts with adequate source separation. So we do have a a lot of the accounts do have the service. Are they participating? Well, I'll go more into that right now. Next slide. So just another pretty picture of what our recycling, composting, and landfill bins look like. This is the standard size for residential accounts. That's 1 through 5 unit buildings. Multifamily in San Francisco is 6 units and above. I know that CalRecycle, I believe, the threshold is 5 units and above, but the city does consider 6 and above to be multifamily. Next slide. So about our multifamily portfolios, I like to call it, we have over 203,000 housing units in multifamily, more than 8,000 multifamily buildings. So it is a really compromises a lot part of the housing stock in the city. 150 of these 8,000 buildings generate more than 40 cubic yards per week. So these are, I'm sure there might be some small towns here that don't generate as much from one, from like the residential sector. But my key point that I'm trying to make in this presentation is that we need to start working with the large properties first. That is where you're going to move the needle. Real quick, yeah, 80% of the city's housing was built before 1980. So we do deal with a lot of different buildings. Ones built during the gold rush era, during the 80s, new condo buildings, buildings that have survived disasters like earthquakes and fires. So it's a pretty diverse city with a lot of diverse buildings. Next slide. Our strategy has always been to engage property managers through technical assistance. This has proven to be a really successful method. I don't think this might be the right slide deck, but it's okay. So we do engage property managers through technical assistance. It is the key to success. I advise you to empower property managers because they know their buildings better than we do. And providing them with the tools is essential to getting compliance. An unengaged property manager will not comply, no matter if you do enforcement, no matter if we throw all the outreach in there, as soon as we're gone, it will flop. So consistent communication with property managers is success, especially communicating with the apartment associations. If your town has one or city has one, start becoming a presence in the apartment association. Next slide. So we do have a really lovely composting property manager toolkit. You can Google search it. This is basically once a year, we send a letter to all property managers in the city. So 8,000 property managers receive a letter. The letter reminds them what their responsibility is as property managers. On top of every other responsibility property managers do have, I do acknowledge that they do a lot of work. So I try to be like their zero waste angel on their shoulder because they have so many other things that they have to deal with. So we do offer free on-site consultations. Again, it's not just me. I have assistance from our Holler Recology. I've had projects with consultants, Cascadia being one of them. That's great at multifamily work. And Mian will be talking about the role of zero waste facilitators. These are third service companies that provide sorting and educational services. But the toolkit just contains information on how and why do they have to comply with composting and recycling and how they can improve access and education. Next slide. So I talked about the importance of engaging property managers. The next one is the importance of engaging maintenance staff from the very beginning. So when you're doing walkthroughs, make sure that the maintenance staff is part of the conversation. They know better even than the property manager themselves. The property manager moves the money around to ensure that that the building is able to adapt to any needs to make more, to increase recycling whatsoever. But the maintenance staff are the ones that really do all the busy work, including cleaning enclosure areas, removing contamination sometimes. So it's really important that they sit at the table when working with a property. Next slide. We offer a self-assessment form for monitoring contamination. So again, during our trainings with property managers and with maintenance staff, we do provide them this form so they can monitor contamination. Basically, it's like a waste assessment guide. This is available on the website. And it has really helped for them to understand what goes where in order for them to communicate what's being contaminated on site, and not rely so much on the city or the hauler to do that for them. So like, again, like we're being proactive by empowering property managers and maintenance staff to assess contamination so that way they know what needs help in their property. Next slide. So if you are rolling out recycling composting for the first time, this is what has worked the best for us. Start with a site visit, do a waste assessment, service level change recommendation based on the assessment, not based on what you think is the best thing. The management approves the changes, and then it's rollout day. Everyone is involved. Everyone has a role. The hauler has to deliver the bins. We have to be there to ensure everything goes smoothly. The property manager notifies residents. The next day we go back and we conduct door-to-door outreach. Yes, every single resident is informed that there is new services coming to the property. And then we monitor contamination and participation. Next slide. This next part of my presentation will cover the importance of setting up collection areas for success. I think this is a key, more important than outreach for our sector, is setting up collection areas for success. Next slide. So I think in our perfect world, multifamily would have a lovely enclosure. I'm sure y'all will come across that's not the case in our cities. Not every single property will have a perfect enclosure, so we do adapt to different waste enclosure types. Sometimes it gets resistance from residents, sometimes you'll get resistance from property managers. But just adapting is key. So I have put recycling, composting bins right in front of tenants' doors. I've put them in little cramped sections, as you see on the third image here. And the newer sites, we work with them so that they have adequate space. So if you do have a lot of construction going on, I would recommend working with planning department or building departments for them to adopt adequate space collection guidelines while they approve construction sites. And I have that link for you as well that I can send after the webinar. Next slide. We do have minimum service level requirements embedded in our refuse rates. We have a one hauler, one permit in San Francisco pay-as-you-throw system. Through the rates, we basically are able to mandate 8 gallons of compost per unit. It's a little bit high, honestly. I think 2.5 gallons per unit is adequate for multifamily, or 4 gallons per unit, and that's with 1 or 2 residents living per unit. If you think about it, 2.5 gallon kitchen pail, if they're cooking at home, maybe they generate like 1 pail per week per unit. For landfill is 16 gallons per unit, and for recycling is 16 gallons of recycling per unit. Next slide. Oh, and this is per week. So, yes. Whew, okay. The necessity to address chutes landing into compactors has become a more prevalent issue. This is true for any property that has more than one floor. They'll usually come equipped with trash chutes. I think for more denser cities, especially in the Bay Area, I know that this has become an issue in our industry. I think compactors were once seen as a solution to reduce number of trucks driving around properties, but more recently we've had to remove compactors. So it's become a challenge because properties invest into the compactors. Sometimes they can go as high as like hundreds, thousands of dollars, and the removal of them is complicated. It's a big infrastructure change. So if I would recommend looking into compactors, if there's persistent contamination, removing the compactor from the property is the ultimate solution so that the streams can be sorted. And this is true mostly for recycling and for landfill, where there's rampant contamination. Next slide. Oh. Is it just me or did the presenter go away?
No, we're just in the middle of switching some slides.
Oh, okay. We're going back to the other slide. Okay, so yeah, number one issue is paying for service. I think I covered this already. So we have a high service compliance rate in paper. When I go on sites, this is what I find, right? It's composting bin, sure, they're paying for it for the past 10 years, is locked in a basement. Unless a resident complains that they have no access, or the hauler says that that marks the property as not servicing the bin, residents are not participating. So this again is the importance to do spot checking and assess properties for contamination. Next slide. So enforcement is key. We are able to assess contamination charges and remove diversion discounts. And through an extent for our large properties, we have a refuse separation compliance ordinance where they are audited once every 3 years. If they fail the audit, they are required to engage the services of a zero waste facilitator. Next slide. Contamination charges. This is a 50% surcharge per contaminated refuse stream. The reason why I bring this up, this is an effective way to ensure compliance. So by issuing a contamination charge on a stream, the property is forced to address contamination. And we moved into enforcement because I have exhausted all options in our reach. So I hate to say like as a Debbie Downer, but I think when our city, for example, San Francisco has a 30-year program and outreach is not moving the needle, the only solution is enforcement. That has really made a key difference. So start exploring contamination charges, removing diversion discounts if you have them. Those charges, I know Stop Waste over in Alameda County is also doing this. They work. Next slide. This is basically a description of billing charges. This is what the customer sees. It's somewhat complicated to understand, but the charge basically is per the stream, not per container, and it stays on until the customer addresses the contamination. And they address that by either we do a site visit, or they call the hauler, or they just clean it up and we see improvement on that contaminated stream. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Subject, yes, I think, sorry, okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next one. Okay, so what's the deal with trash chutes? I feel like they're one of the most problematic things other than compactors or chutes landing into compactors. Trash chutes have become the bane of my existence with the sector. Next slide. Basically, residents love to use them and into the abyss it goes. I mean, for them, that's what it means. For us, just means it's going to be rampant contamination. Next slide. I do have the ability in the city to request a chute to close down. This is not part of an ordinance, rather it's a recommendation to the property manager. It's a recommendation to a property that has tried everything from increasing, recycling composting service, done door outreach, signage, everything. Everything has been exhausted. As a last option, close the chute down. I've only done it 10 times. My warning with trash chute closures is that residents can take it to court as a reduction of service, and then you would become involved in part of that lawsuit or court hearing. So be cautious. Every city is different, but it could lead into legalities unless you are able to put that into code somewhere that rampant contamination can result in trash closures. It has helped as well. Next slide. So this is a picture of an adequate, I would say, of a beautiful collection area on a property that once had a trash chute. We closed it down, and the property manager was okay with going with this service type, right? Where like now the residents have to come down all the way to the garage to recycle and to compost. And this is a beautiful setup where they have recycling, composting, there's a compostable bag dispenser. The property manager was willing to buy bags for residents. And it really did address the issue of lack of participation by residents. Next slide. I think I covered this already. Next slide. So this is, to me, what a beautiful trash room with adequate space looks like. The trash, the landfill in this case is still being compacted. That's the yellow container. But the recycling is landing into an open container, into an open recycling container. So that container could be sorted, whether by maintenance staff or by a third-party company. And again, also you can see the composting. It's a composting chute landing into a composting bin, and that way the bin can also be sorted. So for high rises, this is the perfect model. 3 different chutes, all landing into 3 different containers, which could be moved around to be sorted. Next slide. So again, this is the reality sometimes that we see, right? So here we have 3 perfect chutes landing 3 containers. It's still going to cost this. And I think some of us already experienced this issue. The bags, I mean, just a lot of contamination. So we're super lucky to have over 30 zero waste facilitation companies in San Francisco assisting properties in removing contamination at these properties. Next slide. Again, I touched base on zero waste facilitators. These are third-party companies that can sort, that can provide education services for multifamily venues, large commercial accounts. we do require them now for large refuse generators. And I would say 80% of large multifamily properties that I audit fail. So it's a little bit sad for our sector, but I'm happy for our green angels, I call them, these men and women that literally sort people's trash and help our cities get into compliance. Next slide. And one of the beautiful things about zero waste facilitation companies is that they're able to take a task that a property manager just cannot do because they have 600 units, 600 tenants to focus on. So a zero waste facilitator company can come in and reassess services, and Mian can talk more about this. So I don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I cannot read it enough. For large properties, this is the only solution that has worked. Next slide. So this is my last piece of my presentation, communicating the law with tenants. Next slide. Door-to-door outreach is effective for rollouts, is not effective for properties that have ongoing contamination. Door-to-door outreach is not going to be the solution anymore. You have to go higher stream, which is either enforcement or requiring sorters as a last straw. Next slide. Community presentations are most effective for seniors or communities with families, especially, I think a presenter earlier said, providing food draws people in, providing wine, drinks, but seniors they just love community presentations, and it works for them. Next slide. This is our biannual MFDU mailer, so it does get sent to every resident. Just as a reminder that recycling composting is mandatory. So it's like our online recycling guide. Next slide. And we, of course, offer free tools to increase participation. So for affordable housing sites, we do offer this recycling tote. Kitchen pails are available for everyone. And then the orange are that's a battery bucket to get batteries out of the streams, which is a big issue in multifamily as well. Next slide. They're not provided for free. Compostable bags increase participation and decrease contamination. If CalRecycle plans to move away from compostable bags, it's going to be impossible to address participation in multifamily. So this is my plea for us as an industry to allow compostable bags. I know that compostable plastics are not breaking down, but compostable bags are necessary in our sector. Next slide. This is our sfrecycles.org page. It's that has recently changed, but again, we have an online presence for residents. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Sorry, I know I covered so many topics, but yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone. I've been in the sector since 2017. I know the ins and outs of multifamily. So thanks for having me be here.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mian. I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Waste Experts. I know Freddie covered a lot of the topics that I will be covering today as well. So thank you, Freddie, for taking, a big deep dive into all of that for me. We can move on to the next slide, please. So who are we? Waste Experts. We are a certified zero waste specialist that provides on-site solid waste and recycling solutions for multifamily dwellings. We've been providing our services in the West Coast region for over 3 decades. We're always trying to provide new and innovative solutions for the ever-changing marketplace and try to focus on improving our clients' environmental impact. Waste sorting and recycling programs are just some of the many waste solutions we provide for our multifamily communities. We've been working with the city of San Francisco and the local Hall of Ecology to improve recycling diversion and outreach to residents. As we all know, that poses a big challenge. So prior to SB 1383, Waste Experts has helped multifamily dwellings comply with the City of San Francisco's refuse separation ordinance that was passed in 2009. So we provide on-site sort separation, and we do that boots on the ground. We provide, new solutions of, any properties that might have spatial constraints or just that's designed super unique. If they are older buildings, they just don't have the ability to redesign their setup. So we do come up with unique ways and try to customize that per property. Our services focus on providing programs that are looking for solutions to comply with state and city regulations. We try to work with property management companies that are really focused on this. We know how challenging it is for some of those properties that might have a one-chute system, maybe just don't have the maintenance team support that can do this work themselves, or just looking to increase resident participation in driving up their recycling diversion. So since each property is so unique, we'll customize that for them. With our programs, we have the capacity to improve recycling, we'll remove waste out of the landfill, and help reduce and eliminate contamination for these properties. Can move on to the next slide. So some of the on-site recycling programs that we offer are Green Bag program, which is focused primarily for compost. So what we will do is we will install, these containers or these little devices that actually house the compostable bags. So then that way tenants can have them on each resident floor. They have easy access to them. They can take it back to their homes, line their kitchen pails, fill it with food contents or compostable material, bag that up, and throw it down those chutes. So it makes it really, really easy for participation. And most of our bags are BPI certified. And so, we do, partner with companies that, every municipality will accept. So if there are some cities that do not accept these compostable bags, our waste sorting team will actually break open these break open the bags, dump out the contents into the compost totes, and make sure that those bags are placed into the landfill. So we do know that every municipality is a little different. So we just try to operate and educate ourselves to make sure that we're placing the right materials into the right streams. The other recycling type of program that we offer is the Blue Bag program. This is focused on recyclable materials. So plastic bottles, cans, same type of setup here for some of those buildings that have a difficult time where residents may not have access to certain trash rooms at the ground level, or they just have a one-chute system where it's only meant for garbage or landfill. Then we would offer them the Blue Bag program. So they would, put all their contents into this blue bag. Makes it very easy, color-coded. They will tie those bags up, throw it down the chute, and then our team again at the bottom would be sorting that material out and making sure those contents are going into the right place. Then, we offer a full rounded on-site sorting for cities like San Francisco, where every bag is broken open by our team, and actually every material and every content is sorted. So we are able to make sure that we're in compliance with the refuse separation ordinance and that we are a certified zero waste facilitator. So this really minimizes contamination, optimizing their recycling, improving their recycling diversion discounts that they may get from the city. But the biggest thing about this type of program, it's really important to have the right infrastructure, even at the bottom. As Freddie had mentioned, if properties do have compactor equipment at the very bottom level, it is very, very difficult for that bag to go down the chute because it ends up in a compactor and that cannot be sorted out. So our team will work with property managers and buildings and be able to come up with a way to remove those compactors. So we have assistance from other third parties that can remove those equipments on their behalf. We will do all the coordinating for them, be able to have them understand what the cost impact may be, and we try to find a new home for those compactor equipments, whether it's recycling those scraps or being able to sell off those compactor equipments so then it can be reused for another property in a different city or a different state. Next slide, please. So improving resident participation. We all have had, tons of outreach for our residents, door hangers, flyers, signage up on every level. And we've kind of also experienced the same thing being a vendor and being a partner for some of our property management companies, that they do have a hard time being able to get resident participation. So sometimes it's just having the right access to the right resources and tools. So a lot of the times we will supply those dispensers for these properties. We will be the ones that will install them up on every level and actually provide the compostable bags or the recyclable bags for us to refill these dispensers with. As those get low, we have communications with the properties to refill them. Especially with our team being on site several days a week, we are able to identify, oh, there's been a lot of people that have used these bags. We're able to replace these rolls on their behalf. It's been great working with some of the cities that actually provide kitchen pails. Thankfully, the city of San Francisco does a wonderful job for us to be able to rely on them to be able to provide this as, the right initial first setup. So for some of the cities that may not have the kitchen pails available for first time, properties, then that is something that we also provide together as part of this program. We do not believe it works with one without the other. So having the kitchen pails at their sink, underneath their sink, or somewhere in their household that is accessible is very important. So then that way they can take these bags, line up those pails in, kind of a rinse and repeat. And making sure that these dispensers are always in a location that they have access to. Next slide. So the program options, such as the green bag, as you can see here, this is in a resident trash room on a level that we would install these dispensers. So as a tenant or a resident is disposing of the bag, they can just pull another one, bring it back home, and reline their pails and make it very, very easy for them to use. If for some reason, some of these properties may have spatial constraints as well in these resident rooms, they may only have a one chute system. In those cases, these dispensers are hugely impactful, especially because tenants may not want to walk down their compost bags all the way down to the ground level. Some cities may not allow access for residents to have access into these trash rooms at the ground level, just to maybe unhoused individuals, or just activities, going on at the bottom level, or there could be, liability with that. So in those cases, having these dispensers on every level makes it a lot easier for them, and they have a way to be able to, utilize the program. Next slide, please. So these are also the signage that we place on every resident floor. So it's just a how to use our green bag compost program. We always work with the city or municipality to get signage, and we help laminate these. We place them on every resident floor. So then that way people do understand what contents are allowed in these bags and in this stream. So easy and simple enough. Grab a bag, and from the dispenser, bring it back home, load it up with your contents, tie it up, and throw it down the chute. So there are some buildings that may have a dedicated chute just for compost, and that is always the best setup. But for any of those properties that may only have a 1 or 2 chute system, which is just dedicated to trash or just recycling, then we always ask our residents, please take these compost bags, throw it down the garbage chute, and please make sure those contents are tied up. So then that way we can identify, is there contamination in there? And we also don't want there to be a big old mess. If they don't tie up those bags, throwing it down the garbage chute. And if it is going about 15 floors down, right, there could be a lot of mess that comes along with that. So we also like to advise them, we do have sorters down at the bottom. So, for them to be mindful about the things that they throw down the garbage chute. We don't want a bowling ball throwing down 15 flights of stairs or 15 flights. So we always just let them know, hey, there is someone at the bottom that's helping you guys provide a sorting solution, and that is partnering with a zero waste facilitator. Next slide, please. So the other program option that we provide is the full sorting. So for large refuse generators, our team, as they're breaking open every bag, we do know that residents, if you do have units upwards of 200 plus, it does get very, very difficult for residents all to participate. They may want to do the right things, but may not understand exactly what is acceptable and, what does my city allow, or what does my hauler allow. So sometimes that is, up to our team to be able to educate ourselves on the waste expert side, to be able to help the property managers send out that education. Maybe just a quick how to certain common household items that are acceptable in these waste streams. But as we may know, if that does not work out, enforcement is there. So with that enforcement, our team is going to be actually placing the contents where they need to go. So our team would be getting inside of these containers, and they're going to break open these bags. They're going to dump out liquids and make sure the plastic is going where the plastic needs to go. If there is a full peanut butter jar, making sure that we're, cleaning all of those out and making sure that we're creating clean, dry material that is going to go into the recycle stream. So for any properties that may have those challenges and that cannot control their contamination, then it is helpful to have a third party that is going to help, eliminate these contamination issues. So it may not be wide scale as San Francisco, where every content is being sorted, but for the rest of California state, we still try to provide sorting, breaking down cardboard boxes, making sure that the materials are going into the right places. So sorting is a very, very effective service and program, not only in San Francisco, but all throughout California. So that is something that we do provide for every single one of our clients, and making sure that we are adhering to the rules and regulations of every municipality. Next slide, please. And that's everything on my side, is just, making sure that, we are providing the best quality of service for, the city and our haulers, and making sure that we work together to come up with a common solution. So if you guys have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to ask on the Q&A. Thank you so much for your time. Ward, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Well, let's give a virtual round of applause to our presenters. And I want to extend a huge thank you to all our presenters. We're so grateful that you can share your programs, and thank you for your presentations. Before we open the floor for questions, here's a reminder of some respectful expectations in this space during our discussion time. This includes being open to sharing new perspectives, being mindful of others, waiting to ask questions, and speaking respectfully. Next slide, please. Oops. Okay, for this webinar, we'll be using the Q&A function. Please type a summary of your question into the Q&A pane. You may use the chat pane to share information or resources with other participants, but please do not put your questions into the chat. We will not be monitoring the chat for questions. If you do not see the Q&A pane, please make sure you have the most updated version of Zoom. My colleagues and I will be filtering through your questions. Once called upon, please unmute yourself and state your name, affiliation, and restate your question. If your question is geared towards a specific panelist, please note that. CalRecycle is also available to answer questions, so feel free to include your questions to CalRecycle as well. We will also be monitoring the SLCP inbox throughout the chat. You may send peer share requests, feedback, and panelist questions to the slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. Use the subject line SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. If you cannot unmute yourself or able to use the chat, the QA pane, please also submit your question to the SLCP inbox. If we do not get to your question during the Q&A session, we will have your land representative get back to you. Now, let's pass the floor to Zach and begin our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Ward. And as Ward mentioned, as we go through these questions, I will be calling upon the names of the people who actually asked these questions in the first place and asking you to read that question out loud. That allows us to have the question be part of the recording of this webinar. So even if you've seen that your question was answered in the Q&A, go ahead and read it out loud anyways, and then we'll be able to get a live response to your question. And our first question is for Tiffany with City of Lodi. This question is from Arlene too. And Arlene, I believe you actually had two questions here, so you're welcome to answer both of them or ask both of those live. One was related to driver surveys, and the other one was related to documenting levels related to the pilot program. So Arlene, go ahead.
Hi, so my question was, you mentioned driver surveys during your presentation. Could you please provide more information on those surveys? And then the follow-up question was, did you require them to document the levels, and how did you get your waste hauler to support the pilot program? Was this something that was already built in or included in your franchise agreement with them?
Thank you for your question, Arlene. For the purposes of the pilot program, the route managers and operation managers verbally surveyed their drivers on about a weekly basis during that pilot program to determine if the organics carts were being used and if the amount of the organics was increasing over that time based on the driver's visual assessments. Currently, we're working on a better way to collect more accurate data regarding the participation levels for multifamily properties and residents, and a way to document those as well. Related to your question about our hauler, we're very lucky. We have a great relationship with our hauler. WM has been very willing to help implement this pilot program and engage with our residents and our properties to ensure that our overall implementation was successful. This specific program was not included in our franchise agreement. Unfortunately, it wasn't even a thought at that time, but it provided, I think, to be valuable not only for our city, our residents, and our properties, but I think WM saw the value in this pilot program and the things that we learned and saw with that as well.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. For our next couple questions here, we're going to be pivoting to City of San Francisco. We have three separate questions here for Freddie. First question is from Naomi Stern, and this question was related to approval of compost collection and chutes. Naomi, go ahead.
I think this question was answered in the chat already. Thanks, Freddie. I was just surprised because our jurisdiction does not allow compost and chutes for because of the potential mess and cleaning of those chutes and maintenance issues.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really have an opinion. The best way to collect it, we are okay with it. But we don't really see any more chutes, composting chutes anymore. I mean, me and might know more, but I think I see more of the single stream chute that has the diverter, which is problematic, or the landfill and recycling chutes. Mian, do you want to add anything on this one?
I think more buildings are designing it to have a 3-chute system, and trying to power wash them or pressure wash them more frequently. And there are really good equipment nowadays that can go up high rises, 50 floors up, right? 25 floors up. And that helps a lot to get that gunk off the walls. Or they may have to have that content actually bagged. So then that way it's not loose material that's going down, because that is what causes a lot of the mold or smells and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. And we have one more question related to the chutes, and this was from Chuck Muir related to height limits and types of chutes. Chuck, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can read that question out loud for us.
Yeah, thank you. Question is there a height limit when you would not require an organic compost chute? I know in Palo Alto, we're getting higher buildings being constructed, like above 7 stories. And so I know the developers pushing back on that requirement, but we do require the 3 chutes.
Yeah, that's great. We have adequate space collection guidelines. Again, guidelines. I don't think it's an actual requirement. And these were actually guidelines that we created through research with Cascadia Consulting Group back in, oh God, like 2019, or I believe. I put them on the chat. I can put them on the chat again. Believe it or not, New York City also has some really cool guidelines because they also have similar housing stock. I wish I could find that. If you Google search New York City shoots or like multifamily collection guidelines, they're able to tell you what is the best type of collection for the type of building, depending on the age of the building, the size, the style. So yeah, every building is different. I think for trash chute closures, I forgot to mention this. Like, I won't close a trash chute if the building doesn't have an elevator, and that's because I wouldn't want to be held liable for, say, a resident that has to carry 3 bags down the stairs because I closed the chute down. So that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Freddie.
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. All right, our next question is going to be for Mill, and this question is another one from Chuck Muir. Chuck, go ahead and unmute yourself. This was related to number of units that were distributed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a couple questions. Wondering how many of the mill units you have distributed. How are you paying for those units? I assume they're not free. And then some other questions. How do you track the lid openings? I'm assuming maybe there's an app involved in that. And then the unit itself, is it able to break down paper towels, paper milk cartons, or compostable utensils, possibly made out of PLA or similar?
Thanks, Chuck. Great questions. So first off, how many mill units have we distributed? Nationwide, we're at tens of thousands. For West Valley pilot specifically, we're at around 25 and climbing. In terms of who pays for mill, there we have different cost structures. So we work with a city to figure out what cost structure makes sense for them. Of course, we have a direct-to-consumer business as well, where folks can buy a mill outright. But if we're partnering with a city, in the case of West Valley, for example, they use grant dollars to provide the residents the device free of charge. However, in other city partnerships, mill can be bundled as a component of waste services. So kind of depends on what your specific situation is, and we're happy to explore that further one-on-one following the call. In terms of tracking lid opens, the device is connected to Wi-Fi. So we do have a Wi-Fi connection that enables us, and then the device also has sensors in it. So that enables us to both sense the lid opens, as well as the built-in scale lets us weigh how much mass is being added. And then with the Wi-Fi connection, we're able to collect that data. Of course, we aggregate and anonymize any data that's shared, but that's how we're able to do that. And then lastly, your question on processing non-food items, basically. So mill was designed for food scraps. That's the primary use case. Paper towels and compostable materials can be added. However, there's not as much of the volume benefit. So one of the kind of value propositions of mill is that it's going to reduce food mass by 80%. And so without that moisture content, there's less of a benefit. And we generally would not recommend any poly-coated products. The other consideration is how you intend to use the food scraps or food grounds after they're processed. So in some cases, we have folks and customers that like to use the food grounds for backyard composting, chicken feed, things of that nature. And of course, there's different standards and requirements required for those use cases. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Sydney.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Sydney. Our next question is another one for Freddie. This one's from Kristen Sales. Kristen, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just was wondering, when you have those violations that aren't necessarily that customers aren't compliant with service, but rather they are not compliant with separating or giving their residents access, or because I've seen a lot of like sabotage from landlords and stuff like that, of like not letting their residents have access. And so I was just wondering, when you send out those specific notifications, do you what part of the regs do you pull from, and like what does that kind of look like? Because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I have service, so I'm compliant.
Well, so if there's a violation, so on our mandatory recycling composting ordinance, section 1904, there are specific requirements for multifamily property managers and owners. So one of those sections is a requirement that property managers must provide adequate capacity and access to residents. So I really have not issued a violation to that specific code. However, it does happen a lot, especially we have what we call like a snitchers line or whatever. It's like when residents don't have access, or like you said, I think it's very common. The property manager in paper, sure, we're compliant, 98%, yay. When you go boots on the grounds, no, the bin is hiding. And then, so when working with a property manager, I'm quickly to point out that requirement as the way to start the conversation. And I think, actually, Mian and I dealt with a property recently of a resident claiming not to have access to the composting bin. And so it was basically like working with the facilitator, working with the property manager, working with maintenance staff, and really it was more an issue of the resident not knowing where the composting bin is. So sometimes it's like, we have to really, like, the most effective way is to do a site visit and to really communicate directly with who is handling the waste on site. Yeah. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, Freddie. And I actually have another couple ones here for you. First one here is from Leonardo Falcon. Leonardo, if you want to unmute yourself and read that question out loud for Freddie, that would be great.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Freddie. I saw that you put it in the chat. I was just asking, San Francisco has recycling compactors. Reason I ask is some of our multifamily developers submitted plans to the city of Sacramento with recycling compactors in mind, and we hadn't heard of it, so we asked our haulers about it too, and they said they didn't really do that either. So seeing the photos in your presentation about it was just a little surprising to know that they're out there and at multifamily properties. Have there been a lot of issues with those, or are those generally non-contaminated? Like, what's your experience?
Yes, excellent question. So we have buildings in the city that have 400, 600 units that are over like 20 stories high. So traditionally, those buildings have been equipped with compactors, but as the buildings are trying to address contamination and sort the actual contaminated stream, I see more and more multifamily buildings through the help of waste experts, for example, pulling out those compactors. It's kind of a difficult situation because at the same time, we want less trucks on the road, but we also want to address the contamination. The only way to address contamination at a multifamily property with a compactor is to remove the compactor from the chute and intercept it with an open container. Actually, I'm gonna refer to Mian on this one because they're like the experts on this. So Mian.
Of course. So Leonardo, there's usually with the compactors from what I've seen from buildings, and it's outside of San Francisco as well. Like I see them in Los Angeles and just like larger metropolitan cities that, have small spaces and you can't house a bunch of open top containers in there. So sometimes it's necessary to have recycling compactors, and usually those are property owned, which means that they would find a vendor who would weld, or build those compactors themselves. So I don't know necessarily if the hauler would provide it, but usually from what I've seen is that the properties own those compactor equipments themselves and have them custom built for specific properties. So as Freddie mentioned, yeah, it makes it a lot more challenging for sure on the contamination front. However, it sometimes is necessary for those buildings that just cannot house, especially when you got 500 units, one trash room only, and everyone's funneling all of their garbage to one location. You can't, unless those containers are going to be staged out every single day and rotated out every day, it would probably be super helpful to have a recycling compactor. But if you do have any questions, Leonardo, I'm happy to, kind of point you in the right direction with the right vendor who would actually custom build those, if that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Mian and Freddie. Our next question we're going to be posing here to all of our presenters. This was from Julia Ribeiro. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name. But Julia, if you want to go ahead and read aloud those two questions you had, and then I'll open the floor for any of our presenters to answer this one.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So my first question is, do you have any experience working with MFD properties that have trash enclosures that are easily accessed by the public, leading to the public frequently contaminating private containers? I personally have a lot of properties I deal with that aren't willing to install locks or cameras on their enclosures, and they use this excuse of the public every time there's contamination. And so just looking for feedback on that. And then also as a second question, what is your approach when dealing with a property manager who will not work with you, respond to your calls, that type of thing? How do you get their attention?
Thank you, Julia. And maybe we can go with, I believe, Tiffany, you had drafted a response to this in our written Q&A. Tiffany, do you want to take a crack at this one?
Yes, hi there. Yes, Julia, I think that probably all jurisdictions deal with this issue in some capacity. We here do have many properties that have unsecured enclosures. Older buildings often don't have enclosures at all or have very small or unsecured enclosures. Most of our property managers are more than willing to secure them when it's possible to do so. They want to keep contamination to a minimum, and it also helps keep their properties clean and well maintained. We do have a handful of properties that have limited options to be secured. We try to work with them along with our hauler to come up with what the best solution is for their specific situation, and try to find ways to help them. But it is very difficult. As far as dealing with them when they don't want to work with us, most of ours do. We're very lucky again with that. But what we find that works is that when we have properties that aren't willing to participate or don't want to work with us, enforcement usually gets their attention. If they're not willing to provide education or let us engage with those residents, they won't sort their waste streams and the contamination fees will add up. And usually that's what starts getting their attention when those bills for contamination come in.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I'll leave a few seconds here in case any of our other panelists want to address those questions as well.
I can jump in real quick. From what I've seen, if you're not really receiving a response from property managers, I would definitely maybe try to bring up their trash spend or increase that has happened due to contamination. That usually is what will capture their eyes because it is something that hits their bottom line. So anytime that they have a trash spend increase and that continuously increases due to that enforcement, usually gets them kind of more engaged and maybe being able to come up with a solution to start driving some of those trash spends down. Would you probably get them to participate in some kind of solution? So that's usually, you know, if I'm ever one that's brought in to kind of mediate the situation with a property manager, that helps a lot when we're assessing their garbage invoices, how much is allocated towards contamination or overflow. Then they start to really try to come up with solutions that'll make a change. But illegal dumping, we have seen time and time again, is very, very difficult to manage unless their maintenance team really participate to get that, you know, those, I guess, like bulk items out of those containers or shifting some of that material around the property to some of the other containers that are less heavily loaded.
For my last thought, for when you can't reach a property manager, show up in person. Contact the owner if the manager does not work. At last, most of these multifamily properties are owned by big companies. Sometimes I go straight to the developer. Like, if I can't reach the manager, I'm gonna go to like their subnational or national to get the contact for that specific property, and it works.
Thank you, Freddie. All right, we have one final question for you all today. This question is actually for CalRecycle. And this question is, are jurisdictions required to provide education and outreach to each resident of a multifamily complex?
Sorry, that takes, oops, my camera wasn't showing, apologies. So this is a question that we have addressed on our frequently asked questions or Q&A on our website. And so I'm going to share the response with you. Let's see. The SB 1383 regulations, specifically Title 4 CCR Section 18985.1, requires that a jurisdiction provide annually organic waste recovery and outreach to organic waste generators that are provided an organic waste collection service. An organic waste generator means a person or an entity that is responsible for the initial creation of the organic waste. If a jurisdiction has residents who are organic waste generators living in multifamily dwellings and using shared waste carts or bins, the jurisdiction needs to annually provide all residents with the required education and outreach pursuant to the aforementioned section 18985.1. Additionally, Section 18984.10 requires that commercial businesses, including multifamily residential dwellings of 5 units or more, to annually provide information to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers about organic waste recovery requirements and about proper sorting of organic waste. Commercial businesses must also provide information to new tenants within, before or within 14 days of occupation of the premises. And if the jurisdiction discovers that a commercial business or property owner is not annually providing the required education and outreach to its employees, contractors, tenants, and customers, then the jurisdiction is authorized to begin enforcement under, again, SLCP regulations section 18995.4.
Thank you so much, Marshall, for providing that clarification. And with that, we'll go to Ward to close us out. Ward, take it away.
Thank you, Zach. This concludes today's SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. We are incredibly grateful to our presenters for sharing their insights and to all of our attendees for taking the time to join us today. Your encouragement is what makes these chats so valuable, and we appreciate your participation. If you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up for our SB 1383 listserv to stay informed. And now let's turn it over to Marshall for closing remarks.
I thought those were the closing remarks. You did a fantastic job. Thank you. And thanks again to the fabulous CalRecycle team. We're ever so grateful for each of the presenters and all of your participation as attendees. This forum is created for you, so keep those future topic ideas coming our way. This is truly a collaboration, and we need your input to ensure that we're meeting your needs. With that, I look forward to our next chat and wish you all a very wonderful afternoon.